Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely massive, the 2026 India-US trade deal. It's a fascinating agreement that's kind of completely reshaping international economics right now. On one hand, we're looking at billions in projected economic gains, a total triumph of diplomacy. But on the flip side, there are these intense grassroots fears with thousands of Indian farmers marching in protest. So, we're going to break down both sides of this story using the data straight from the source material. Let's get into it.
Here's a quick look at what we'll be covering today. Resolving the trade crisis, the government's macro win, why farmers are protesting, a tale of two farms, the dairy industry dilemma, and finally, safeguards versus survival.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, resolving the trade crisis, moving from tariff wars to trade deals.
You know, the sheer speed of this economic roller coaster has been just wild. Back in August 2025, the U.S. slapped these massive, sweeping 50% tariffs on Indian goods. It was basically a huge pressure campaign tied to India's imports of Russian oil, and things were incredibly tense. But remarkably, by November, Indian exports to the U.S. actually rebounded to nearly $7 billion. India really held its ground on its strategic autonomy. And then, by February 2026, we saw a massive de-escalation. This new trade deal came in and rationalized those punishing tariffs down to an average of just 18%.
Okay, moving right along to Section 2, the government's macro win and those billions in projected surplus.
We are talking $45 billion. That is the massive annual trade surplus that academic and financial analysts are projecting for India because of this deal. When you zoom out and look at the macro picture, it's an incredible victory for the country's economic standing.
And hey, this isn't just about heavy industry or big tech either. This deal provides an estimated 4.8 lakh crore rupees in annual welfare gains. Plus, it secures over $1 billion in assured zero-tariff access for Indian agricultural exports. So Indian rice, spices, and tea, they suddenly get a highly competitive entry straight into the American market.
In fact, according to SBI research, this agreement uniquely catapults India into a seriously powerful strategic position globally. They calculate that India saves around $3 billion in foreign exchange reserves, and they manage to do this without giving up any sensitive ground on their independent foreign policy. Honestly, on paper, it looks like an absolute masterclass in trade negotiation.
But let's flip the coin and look at Section 3, why farmers are protesting. Because the microeconomic reality is vastly different.
This brings us to a really stark contrast. If this deal is generating literally billions in surplus, why are thousands of farmers aggressively mobilizing at the Shambu border to halt the agreement? It's a crucial question, and it really highlights the intense friction between global economic integration and grassroots survival.
Organizations like the Samyukta Kisan Morcha, or SKM, have a completely different read on the situation. They're actually calling the deal a total surrender to American agricultural giants. The unions argued that this whole thing was negotiated behind closed doors and corporate secrecy. They're even demanding that the president intervene to make the free trade documents entirely public so they can have a proper parliamentary debate.
Which leads us to Section 4, a tale of two farms, diving into the agricultural asymmetry.
This structural inequality we're looking at here is just shocking. On one side, you have the U.S., heavily subsidized, highly mechanized megafarms that average 469 acres, and agriculture there is only about 2% of the workforce. On the other side, India. Incredibly fragmented holdings averaging a tiny 2.67 acres, but making up 48% of the entire workforce. It is an enormous David and Goliath scenario, but Indian farmers feel like they haven't even been handed a slingshot.
When you see that 86% of Indian farmers own less than 5 acres, the panic is totally palpable. The real fear is that an open trade deal is going to flood the Indian market with artificially cheap, heavily subsidized American maize, soybeans, and pulses. With U.S. yields being so high and costs kept so artificially low through their subsidies, Indian farmers are terrified their local pricing will just be completely destroyed.
Let's zoom in even closer on Section 5, the dairy industry dilemma, and this looming crisis for cooperatives.
Seriously, put yourself in this position for a second. Imagine you're a dairy farmer with maybe just 2 cows, relying entirely on your local cooperative to survive. For millions of small farmers, particularly rural women in states like Punjab, dairy isn't just some big corporate business. It's a lifeline. It pays for education, it puts food on the table.
The fear is that if cheap U.S. milk powder and cheese hit local shelves, those local cooperatives that buy their milk could just collapse entirely.
And this all ties directly into the concept of MSP, or minimum support price. Right now, the government pumps around 73,000 crore rupees into the economy to procure crops like wheat and paddy at guaranteed prices. Even if this new deal doesn't target those specific crops right away, farmers are deeply worried that exposing the broader market to global subsidized prices will basically render the whole MSP protection system completely useless in the long run.
So, how do we bridge this gap? That brings us to Section 6, Safeguards versus Survival and Navigating the Future.
Well, the government and academic researchers are quick to point out that this isn't just an unmitigated free-for-all. They've woven a pretty heavily calibrated system of safeguards into the deal. For example, there's a massive 38,000 crore rupee credit guarantee fund set up specifically to help micro, small, and medium enterprises adjust to this new competitive reality.
And remember that dairy dilemma we just talked about? Well, to handle that, the government put in something called a TRQ, a tariff rate quota. Basically, they set a strict 75,000 metric ton limit on lower tariff dairy imports. This TRQ is supposed to act as a protective ceiling, essentially acting as a valve to ensure that American imports can't just totally overwhelm and drown out the local cooperatives.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're basically watching two vastly different realities trying to coexist inside a single agreement. The ultimate success here hinges entirely on whether those government safeguards can truly protect 146 million smallholder farmers, all while the broader economy reaps billions in rewards. Which leaves us with the ultimate question. Can a macroeconomic triumph ever truly be balanced with grassroots survival, or is global integration always going to leave the smallholder farmer behind?